Welcome to the Global Supply Chain Marketing Group, brought to you by Supply Chain Brain Media. I'm your host, Ralph Henderson. The Global Supply Chain Marketing Group is a professional development webinar series for supply chain marketing professionals like you. And we are here to talk about all things lead generation, branding, online strategy, earned media, and today's topic, content development. Boost engagement, create winning content. Let's start with a simple question today. If content marketing is supposed to be working, why does it feel like so much of it isn't? There's more blogs, more videos, more posts than ever, and yet less engagement, less impact, and too often no real results. Well, that's not because teams aren't working hard. It's not because you're not working hard. It's because we as marketers make the same content mistakes everyone else makes, and almost no one talks about it honestly. Well, today we're going to change that. This session is about those content mistakes that quietly drain time, budget, credibility, and how the best marketers avoid them. So as we go into the next 12 months, we will be better prepared. We'll tackle things like which content is actually worth creating and which isn't. How much branding is too much branding? What data should guide our strategy and what data should we stop chasing? And how to apply the right level of promotion so that this content actually performs. Good news, there's no better person to guide us through this conversation than our guest today. Melanie Diesel is a creative systems architect who helps organizations unlock creative potential by building smarter, more effective content systems. She's an award-winning branded content creator, a keynote speaker, and the author of the Content Fuel Framework and Prove It. That's the name of the book, I promise. And they're both really must reads for us as supply chain marketing professionals on generating ideas and, most importantly, earning trust through content. So today's going to be interactive. Make sure you put your questions in the Q&A panel. We'll get to as many of those today live as possible. If we don't get to them, we will get back to you after the show. Today, we want you to leave with clarity and a plan you can use. So let's get started. Welcome, Melanie. It's all yours.
Awesome. Glad to be here, and thanks for the warm intro there. It's always exciting to me when we get to tackle these questions because I think they're so important. And it's like you said, nobody's talking about these things. We're just all sort of wondering, asking the same questions behind the scenes, trying to figure out like what's happened, what can we do to fix these things? So, what I want to focus on today is I want to provide you with a system that you can use to come up with new content ideas. Because many of us are probably in the same boat, right? We're talking about the same things over and over again, whether it's the same events that happen year after year, whether it's reminding people of the same products that we offer that we always have, right? There's a lot of times that we have to say the same sort of messages that we've said many times before, but we want to keep it fresh. We want to keep it engaging. We want to bring something new to the table. So that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Now, the challenge, of course, is if we are going to be sharing our message and getting that engagement consistently, we've got to come up with new ways to do it. Because if we just keep posting the same things, we just keep sharing the same things, we find, as we talked about, that our engagement is going to suffer, right? People start to sort of turn a blind eye to it, to ignore it, and to tune us out if we're saying the same things over and over again. So we want to be coming up with new content ideas. The challenge, of course, is we need a system to do that, right? If we want on-demand creativity, then we need a system we can rely on to come up with new content ideas. So as promised, today I'm going to teach you my system for coming up with content ideas. It's a system that I explain a whole bunch more about in the Content Fuel Framework, the book that Ralph mentioned there in the intro. But what I'm aiming to do today is to give you the best possible overview of that so you can take action on it without even having to read the book. I would love if you do, but you don't have to. I want to give you everything you need to move forward with coming up with new, fresh content ideas to help you get that engagement that you're hoping for. I always caveat this by saying this is not the only system that has ever existed for coming up with content ideas, but it is mine and I am going to give it to you. So that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today. Now, what I'm going to share will seem on its face like it's a lot to take in one session. I want to impress upon you that I promise you this is very approachable, very doable. Most of the things that I'm sharing are not going to be new things you've never heard of. They're not going to be brand new things that you've never thought of before. We're just going to be arranging those ideas in a new way and sort of approaching them in a new way. So while it seems on its face like it may be a lot, it's going to be easy for you to slot into the work that you're already doing. Now, I'm a words person, not a math person, but the only math you're going to need for today's session is to understand that a content idea, when we talk about I need to come up with some content, I need to come up with an idea, I need to know what to post, we think of it as one thing. Like, here's this piece of content, and there's one idea behind it. Each of those content ideas is actually two separate things. It is the focus, and the format. Now, the focus is sort of like you could call it the topic, the perspective, the approach, the theme, right? What is it that we're actually going to say, right? Like, what is the content of that content? What is it that we're going to be sharing? The message, what are we communicating? The format is how are we going to communicate it? How are we going to say it? How are we going to package this theme, this topic, this idea? How are we going to package that and deliver it to our audience in a way that is engaging? Now, the reason I want to make this super clear is because when we are trying to figure out how to create content that's going to be more engaging, that's going to get us the type of engagement we're looking for, these are both levers that we can pull. Both the focus and the format are things that we can shift and change and align to create that kind of new, fresh engagement we're hoping for. Here is what we're going to tackle today. And again, I know it sounds like a lot, but I promise you these are not new concepts for you. They're just arranged in a new way. I'm going to give you 10 potential focuses that you could consider as you're creating content. 5 are going to be really familiar topics you're probably already covering. And then 5, I hope will be a little bit of a stretch to try something new. I'm also going to go over 10 different formats, 10 different ways you can deliver your content, packages you could put it in. Again, 5 that are pretty familiar and 5 that might be a little bit of a stretch. Try something new. And when you have 10 times 10, my friends, again, I'm not a math person, but 10 times 10 is pretty easy for us. We end up with 100 potential ways to tell any story. So the goal here, not going to be to have you create 100 pieces about any one topic, but to make sure that you never have that feeling of like, what am I going to do? How do I make this fresh? How do I approach this in any sort of new way? How am I going to make this same old story feel exciting and engaging to my audience? I want you to start with 100 instead of starting with 0. That's my goal. Now, there's an important lesson we need to focus on here. And that is you should always decide your focus, your theme, your topic, your message before you decide your format, the package you are going to put it in, right? This is incredibly important. And I think in this group, given that we all are supply chain folks, this will probably hit a little closer to home than usual. But this is the example I always give. Have you ever received maybe a package in the mail, right? Or a gift where you look at the wrapping and you think, surely I didn't order something this big. I ordered batteries. They couldn't be this big box, couldn't be my batteries, right? Uh, and as you open it, you realize that someone clearly decided on that package, on that gigantic box or that gigantic gift bag before they thought about what the content of that package was going to be, something very small, right? Now, when you do that, whether it's a package you're mailing or a gift, you end up having to put a lot of filler in there. Right? You put a lot of bubble wrap. You put in the crumpled up craft paper. You're making shapes out of tissue paper to try to fill that giant bag, right? And in both of those situations, the recipient ends up confused. Why? Why did you use this package to deliver this particular content? What we want to do is avoid giving our audience that exact same experience, but in a digital environment. We don't want them saying, "My goodness, why was this a video?" Or, "Oh, what? This video should have been an email," right? We don't want to give them that experience, and that's why we will always choose our focus. What are we trying to say before we choose our format? How is the best way to package it? So if we're on board with that commitment, I'm going to give you the tools you need to come up with those focuses and formats and tell those stories in a fresh and exciting way. I want to play the part of Ralph here for a moment and let you know that while I'm going, if you have questions, please do use the Q&A, the chat function. Use that function to go ahead and add those questions. We have time for questions at the end, and we'll be more than happy to answer them. And hopefully we'll be able to answer any of those questions that come up in your head. Just drop them in that Q&A so we can get to them a little bit later. So as promised, focus before format. We're going to start by going over those 10 focuses that I want you to consider. Again, 10 different perspectives and approaches you could take to telling any one story. Now, these familiar five, as I mentioned, not new concepts. You guys are probably creating a lot of this content already. It's nothing crazy that you've never heard of before, but I want to give you the quick run through because these are, again, the most common. So oftentimes we create lots of people-focused content. This is content that is, about maybe our employees, about our customers. This is content about our partners, this is case studies, right? This is testimonials, all this kind of content that is focused on people is the exact kind of content that we're talking about when we say people-focused content. The next one is basics. So again, we probably create a fair amount of this as well. This is things like your FAQ page, if you have any sort of onboarding email sequences, anytime where we're explaining the basics of something is our basics focused content. This stuff is important, right? This is good when we have new customers, new clients, new partners, new relationships. It's important if people are making a purchase for the first time and we kind of need to coach them through that process, make sure they understand what's coming next and what we need from them. But again, these two pretty common when you have to tell a story saying, all right, well, we got to cover the basics. Let's make sure we give them the basic steps. And let's talk about the people who are involved, whether that's a case study of a successful past client or something else. Moving on to our third one here is details. So I would say that basics and details are like sisters or cousins, whatever resonates with you, whatever you've got and can have some context for. But if you are creating basics focused content for maybe new clients, new customers, first time purchasers, anyone who needs to understand the basics of a particular topic, you probably also have a segment of your audience that is beyond that. They've already done the basics. They already know the basics. They're repeat, returning, long-time customers, partners, and clients, etc. So that's where you're going to have that more detailed, focused content. You probably approach it a little bit differently, knowing they already have that base level of knowledge. But again, these are three potential options. The fourth one is history. Now, this is a lot of fun, and I think hopefully y'all are creating some sort of history-focused content. We tend to find it a lot on our about page, for example. Company history. Those sorts of pages are rich with this kind of stuff. But I want to encourage you to ask that question when the time comes. Okay, we have this new launch that we're doing. We're showing up at this new trade show. We're doing some sort of new partnership or new program. How can we, instead of talking about just the right now, how could we look to the past? Let's talk about what it took to get us here. Let's talk about the evolution or the growth that brought us to this point. Let's talk about the precedents. Let's talk about the various developments and events throughout history that have led us to this point and brought us to where we are now. So a history-focused approach to telling stories can often help you stand out. Again, when we're used to talking about, as marketers, the now and the next, looking back at the past is a great way to differentiate our storytelling. All right. And our next one of the familiar five, the last of our familiar five here, again, focuses being the approaches you can take to telling a story, is process. Process. Now, again, I think for this group in particular, we are focused on process. We understand logistics, right? This is a place where we spend a lot of our time and our brain space is taken up with this already. But process-focused content is any time we are trying to help the audience achieve something. So again, if let's say we have a new product coming out, we're releasing something new. Now, of course, we can talk about the people who went into that, who are helping to create it. We can share the basics, the product specs, the integration details, whatever, the history of how this product came to be developed or the line of products before that brought us to this point. But the process-focused content is going to be, what does our audience need to do with this information, and how could we help them do that? So this might be how to upgrade, right? How to see if this is compatible with whatever it is that you're already using. How to figure out which rep is the right rep to talk to get moving on getting this new product into your space. How to prepare for your first meeting. There's lots of things, both physical preparations of like actions to take and even mental, right? How to think through, how to determine, how to evaluate, how to analyze, options that we can be giving folks for how to do things differently. So those are our familiar five. Again, five potential focuses when you're trying to tell a story in a new way that you've maybe told a bunch of times, asking yourself, could I tell this story through the lens of people or details or history or process? Could be a way for you to tell them in a slightly new way. Now, these next five you may also be doing, but these next five are the ones that I find tend to need a little bit more explanation, a little more context. So we're going to do that with these next five focuses. I'm going to give you a little bit more information, suggestions, ideas for these next five focuses to bring us to our 10 total that we have to consider. Curation. So curation is one that I think is great, particularly if you're tight on resources, right? You're tight on resources. It's easy to collect things that others have created or that you've created in the past as a way to create something new. So maybe you don't have necessarily the time that you want or the resources you want to create a brand new video, create a new webinar, create something else. You could always create a collection of some kind that says, hey, here's our five most attended webinars from the past year, right? This is a perfect time of year. You guys are going to see a ton of curated content if you haven't already. People doing their year-end wrap-ups, their best of the season, best of 2025, right? You'll see people prepping for a new year, best of 2026, right? What to expect this coming year. People are going to be collecting and creating these lists, these collections. Gifts is another great example, curated gift suggestions or recommendations. All of these things fall into that category of curation. So the question to be asking yourself here is, okay, we have to tell this same old story. We want to tell it in a new way. What could we collect that would make telling that story easier or make understanding that story easier for our audience? So this is an example, again, lists, playlists, collections, galleries, any of those things fall into this category of curation. I want to note here again, they're updatable and repeatable. So if you're creating best of the month, best of the season, best of the quarter, best of the year, that's something you can do time and again and update in different ways. Also noting that you can activate influencers. So what I mean by that is if, for example, Ralph, you were going to say, here are the 10 best webinars to watch as you're preparing for your new year, some of those would probably be your own, right? Ones like this that you've hosted, but you may be able to find some resources from other experts or from other sources that have created something valuable and useful that you want to include. If and when you do that, include content, articles, videos, anything created by others, that's an opportunity to tap into that shared audience, to invite them to say, hey, I included you on my list of 10 podcasts to listen to, my list of, 10 videos to watch, 10 books to read. I would love if you could share it with your audience. People will often feel honored by being included and share it with their audience, which gives you a chance to get in front of folks you may not have otherwise. Oftentimes, these influencers have similar audiences or even larger audiences that we can tap into just by nature of including them when we're creating these curated lists. I also have a note here, just ranked versus unranked. Sometimes people get a little weary of creating a list because they fear, well, if I say that, I don't know, this case study is number one, then what does that say for all my other case studies that I've ranked as number two, three, four, five? I don't want to hurt my clients' feelings. Totally get that. You can create a list of 10 must see without saying that one is number one, number two, number three, or best to worst. You don't have to rank them. You can just say, here's 10 you need to listen to, or 10 you need to watch, or 10 you need to read without playing favorites. So it is possible to do that without upsetting and hurting anybody's feelings here. The next one is going to be data, a data focused story. So again, the question being, I have to tell this story. I've got to create the same sort of announcement, the same sort of content. How could I do that through the lens of numbers? How could I look at the numbers associated with this story and try to tell a numbers focused story? So in many cases, that might be something like a study, it might be a report that you're creating, maybe you're doing an audit or a survey or something like that, creating some proprietary research of your own, but it doesn't always have to be that serious. You can also pull from other existing studies, other existing data. Again, this time of year, as we're looking at like the, end of one year, beginning of a new year, we tend to see people doing a lot of reflecting on the year prior. Here's, stats from, the previous year or preparing for a new year. Here's, stats you need to know going into the new year. So you'll see plenty of examples of this all around. But this is an example of saying like, how do we look for a numbers focused way to tell this story? If you are doing your own study, doing your own, collecting your own data, there's an opportunity for you to get some coverage of that, to uncover some new trends, and to really differentiate yourself by sharing information that can't be found anywhere else. I love giving the example here. Think of any time some sort of food study comes out about eating or drinking, it'll say like, drinking 2 cups of coffee a day helps you live longer, according to a new Stanford study. It's always according to a new Stanford study, right? It's always citing the source of that information. So if you can be the one sharing some new insight, some new data point, that's another opportunity for you to get that earned media coverage and potentially gain traffic and exposure from sources who are talking about this new trend that you've uncovered or this new data point you get to share. All right, product focus. Now, this is one that we're probably doing anyway, and I would wager on some level that everything and every focus in a way is going to be product focused because there's going to be a tie in there. But sometimes it is important for us to just go straight up and go customer education. Like give the specs, give the sizes, give the integration details, give the pricing, give the flavors, whatever it is that you've got. Sometimes we really just need to focus on conversion or sales. And that can sometimes be the hang up. If we're feeling like, gosh, how am I going to make this exciting? This is that reminder that, like, not everything has to be a Pulitzer contender, right? Sometimes we need to create content that is very functional in nature, that is super branded, that is going to be, direct response, that is going to be asking people to sign up, right? Sometimes we just got to do that and we've got to be okay with it. So the reason I keep this in the list is when you're feeling stuck, it's often a good time to take that step back and say, am I trying to boil the ocean here? Am I trying to do something bigger than is necessary for this particular instance? Or maybe I just need a really branded, really product focused piece of content to serve this particular goal. And I don't need to try to make it into anything that it's not. All right, we have example, and there's one more after this for your 10 focuses. Again, not brand new information, but we're arranging it and talking about it in a different way. And again, the power of these things when we combine it with the formats is where that magic system kind of comes into play. So, an example is we look at the large story we're trying to tell again. So maybe that's like, we get this a lot. This charge to say like, talk about how innovative we are. Talk about how we're AI powered or future ready, right? We get these big giant how we're disrupting the space, right? We get these big charges as marketers that are sometimes very, very difficult for us to make sense of, right? It's difficult to create a single story that talks about how disruptive we are in the industry. Excuse me. It's difficult to tell a single story that captures such a big topic, right? And that's where this is a reminder for us to say, okay, well, instead of telling that giant story, what's one example of that in action that we could share more easily and use as a gateway to that bigger conversation? So, my background is as a journalist, and we would call this like a face case. So, just as a very tangible, like relatable example, if you are covering, a local community, a town, a city, a township, whatever, they might say, well, look, we want to talk about how small businesses are struggling right now. So instead of trying to tell a massive story about how however many thousand small businesses are really struggling right now, my instinct as a journalist would be, all right, let me find one small business that has a compelling story. Let me talk about how they aren't getting enough foot traffic. Let me talk about what that's meant for their staffing. Let me talk about what that's meant for their revenue. And then say, Joe Schmo's coffee shop is just one of the X thousand small businesses that are facing this same struggle. So this is that reminder to say, look, if I'm trying to tell a big, big story, sometimes it's better to tell the small story as a gateway into that bigger story. Um, it's also, again, a lot of times our case studies can be very matter of fact of like, we started working with this client on this date, they saw an X% increase in their results, and it's very successful, please give us your money and do business with us. This is that reminder that you can be narratively driven. You can tell a more artistic story, if you will, by having more of an example, by saying, let's just talk about what they're symbolic of rather than just the basic details of what they've done or what we've done for them. It's a chance for you, again, if this is an example of things that you're doing to prove the value of what it is that you're offering, rather than, if you were here for our previous webinar, and we'll share the QR code to check that out if you haven't yet, we talked a lot about providing proof of the value that you can provide to your audience. This is a great way to do that by sharing an example of who you've helped and how. Um, And again, an opportunity for you to give quotes and airtime to people that are important to you, whether that's influencers from the space that can, add credibility to what you're saying, or whether it's the clients you're going to do case studies and examples of. All right, and this is our last of the 10 focuses that we're going to cover today. This is an invitation to think about opinion content. Opinion content. Now, again, this is one that I know can feel kind of scary. For some reason, when I talk about opinion content, I feel like most of our brains go to like, you want me to endorse a political candidate? Like you want me to weigh in on this massive social issue? That's not what we're talking about here. That's not what we're talking about here. This is your invitation to make your content just a little bit more human. A little bit more human. So I'll give you, again, it's an outside of our space. I think sometimes it's easier to see these things at work outside of our own industry because it lets us put our consumer hat on. I want you to think of the last time you went into a physical bookstore or past the book section of a store that you were in. They always have the like bestsellers list, right? And that's objective. That's just like according to data, here's what's selling best or here's what's getting the top ratings. And then they have staff favorites, right? Again, objectively, it's the same thing. It's a top list of books. But there's something special and relatable and interesting about this is what data says is the best, and it's very detached. And then here's a staff favorites list. You get to understand why. It's because this story was set in the town where, so and so cashier grew up, and they said it's a really accurate representation of that town. Well, that's a much better endorsement than this was the third best-selling book in the category last week, right? So this is that reminder to just make your content a little bit more human where you can. It doesn't have to be, drawing a line in the sand or, making some big proclamation that's going to alienate part of your audience. It's a way for you to say, how could I make this content a little bit more human? Could I share a perspective? Instead of curating a list of, again, I'm coming back to this example, Ralph, if you were going to do like the 10 best webinars of the year, you could do 10 best webinars of the year based purely on the data of like how many downloads or how many views. Or you could say your favorite. These were the 5 that were the most fun. I don't know. You don't want to upset any of us. I know we're all very fun presenters. Maybe you don't go that route. But that were the most fun to record, for example. You could do something like that that just, again, sprinkles a little bit more humanity on it than something that's purely objective or data based. So these are our 10. This is what I call the screenshot slide. You can go ahead and take a screenshot here. But again, those of you who are watching, you're going to get the recording. You can pause here. You can refer back to it. And again, they're all explained in more detail in the Content Fuel framework if you want to dive deeper. But these 10 are 10 different approaches you can take to telling any story. So when it's feeling stale, when it's feeling like, man, I've made this announcement 10 times a year, I'm doing this every other week, I'm doing this every month, you can come back to these focuses and say, okay, well, maybe I could tell this same story, but through the lens of history. I've never tried that before. How could we look at the history of this topic, of this product, of this industry, and mix it up a little bit? How could I do it through the lens of process? What is it that our audience needs to achieve here? And maybe I could walk them through the process, the steps, whether that's a recipe or, instructions, how to, DIY. It's an opportunity for you to walk them through those processes. So these are the prompts for you to consider. What are the 10 different focuses I could take? And again, there are more in the universe. I'm not proclaiming that these are the only, but these are 10 that I think are a really good place to start and that are accessible for most of us, regardless of our level of resources we have and maybe our level of experience. Using these prompts will help you come up with new ways. Now, what I want to give you next is actually 3 different prompts you could use to give this stuff a try. So I'm going to pick uh, 3 prompts here just to give you. And again, this could be, consider it like a screenshot slide, or you could write these prompts down. We're not going to do it here now because we got a lot to cover. You guys got a lot of things you got to make more engaging. And I don't want to use this time for us to just sit. If you're watching this on the replay, you can pause it here, think through some of these prompts. But for those of you who are here now, maybe write these down, take a photo, take a screenshot, or wait for the replay so you can come back to this prompts and see if you can come up with some ideas. So prompts here are those that you can consider people. Who are 3 people that you could profile, people that you could create profiles of or content about? That could be in your organization, supporting your organization, nearby. Who are some people that you could create content about? And then curation, 3 things you could collect. Whether that, again, we've given you lots of examples here today, books to read, podcasts to listen to, movies to watch. You could do your favorite blog posts of the year, the email list that got the most open, the webinars that got the most views. Find a way to curate something useful. Gifts for people in your space, right? There's lots of options that you could curate here. And the last one is data. So three topics that you could explore through the numbers. Focus specifically on the numbers related to that story as a new approach to telling something you've had to say many times before. All right, we're moving on now to our formats. Now, this part's going to move a little bit quicker because what I have found is that as a society, as marketers, right, we already have a familiar language to talk about these things. When I say video, you already know what that is, and I don't really need to define it as well. We have less of a shared language around our content focuses, so it required a bit more explanation. Formats are going to feel a lot more familiar. Again, I'm going to give you 10, and 5 are going to be the familiar ones that you're probably already doing in some regard, but hopefully the second batch of 5 there will get you some things that you may not have tried before. So, writing. I want to encourage you to think about these things in the most platform agnostic way possible. When you have a story, you've already figured out your focus and you're asking what's the best way for me to present it. Don't say article, case study, blog post. You're limiting yourself by eliminating other forms of writing. So start with writing. Could we write something about this? Yeah, absolutely. Because then you can ask, well, where might that writing live, right? You can then find other ways to bring it to life. The next one is going to be an infographic. So, and you'll start to see those of you who are picking up on connections here that maybe if you're doing a data focused story, it pairs really well with infographic. There are definitely some natural pairings here, but they all do work together in some way. So an infographic would be we're making a graphic representation of this idea, of this story, of this experience that we want to convey. Next is audio. And again, notice I didn't say just podcast. I think sometimes when we hear audio, we think, okay, well, I'm going to have to get a host and a guest, and we got to do it once a week, and we got to interview somebody for an hour, and we got to have a song at the beginning. It becomes a whole production that feels inaccessible. So sometimes just asking the question, could we do this through audio? That might be as simple as if you're creating a piece of content about someone and you're interviewing them, keeping those quotes in there so people can listen to the person answer your question in their own voice. Hear every pause, every laugh, every bit of tone, right? Every meaningful pause in their voice, every giggle, right? Really bring that humanity into it. You can also do environmental audio. If you're going to a space or a place that your audience can't access, let them inside. Let them hear what that sounds like. You can do something similar with video. Again, I don't need to tell you all what a video is. You know what video is. But I do want to mention that you should consider video and live video as separate formats. Sometimes people kind of lump them in together and use them almost interchangeably just based on whatever's available. I want to encourage you, gently invite you, if you will, to consider these as two completely separate formats because they serve different purposes. Live video is great when you need some sort of live interactive moment. So it's great for a webinar like this if you want that live interaction, if you want to be able to ask the host questions and you want to be able to answer those questions in real time. That's a great use case for live video. If you're documenting an event, right, live as it's happening, it's really advantageous to see it as it's happening. If you want more control over the environment, more control over the final product, you want to make sure that somebody doesn't have a cat filter on their face by accident or the internet connection doesn't go out and pause halfway, then video may be, standard static recorded video may be a better choice for you. So again, you're familiar with these 5. I want to give you 5 that you maybe are using less often or haven't tried at all, because I think it's going to help you branch out in those instances where things start to feel kind of stale or like you're doing the same thing and your audience is no longer reacting to the content the way you want. So this is going to be an image gallery, I don't know what happened to poor images, poor lonely images. Sometime around 2014, I think we all decided that an image was like a required thing you had to include in your blog post or your article before you sent it out. And we sort of lost the value of the fact that many images together can form a really interesting experience. So that might be a gallery of images from an event. It might be behind the scenes, a bunch of photos giving sneak peeks. It could be as simple as like a carousel of a few images or a few graphics on Instagram. There are lots of ways that you could execute this, but the idea being, again, you've had your focus figured out and you say, well, could we create an image gallery that helps us tell the story we want to tell? It tends to be really engaging, more so than some of the static content pieces that we may have suggested prior. In my time at the Huffington Post, prior to this work, We found that slideshows, which was our delivery of an image gallery, generally speaking, if people were willing to go 3 to 5 slides in, they would go all the way to the end because if you care enough to see 3 to 5 pictures of something, you probably care enough to see 10 or 20 or 30 of that same thing. So can be a really valuable way for you to create more of that engagement that we're talking about. And then again, if you're creating a whole gallery, you've got a bunch of images you could reuse throughout social as well. All right, the next one is a timeline. Timeline. So a lot of the stories we tell naturally unfold over time, right? If we're talking about a case study, for example, there's a point where they weren't working with us, and then they were, we did the work, they got the results, right? Things kind of progress over time. It's a natural experience. Um, Same thing if we're launching something. There's when we started creating it, we created it, we're ready to launch, there's post-launch. Things kind of unfold over time naturally. But we often forget that a timeline is a perfectly valid way to tell that story. So I want you to think of how you might share stories in a timeline format rather than just writing, just video, or just something else. What's really cool about a timeline, again, is from an engagement standpoint, your audience can kind of self-explore and move at their own pace. So it tends to create much deeper engagement. It's more visual, which most of our algorithmic overlords love to promote more visual and engaging content over more static content. And it helps us make complex stories more simple to tell. I want to emphasize here, sometimes people get nervous and they're like, I don't have the dev team to build a custom timeline. This can be done in many different ways. Don't let the technology hold you back. If you are fluent in PowerPoint, you can create one slide for each of the points on that timeline, and you can deliver that as a slideshow, right? You can do this in writing, but by simply having the dates and the different points. There's lots of ways that you could execute on this, so don't worry about the technology. There are tools that you can use, or there are workarounds to make it happen. The next one is a quiz. So again, sometime around like 2014, 15, BuzzFeed unfortunately did irreparable damage to the reputation of quizzes by making us think that any quiz on the internet is like, tell me which Friends character you like most, and I'll tell you if you die alone. But there are so much more potential to quizzes than what we have used them for to date. So this makes your content much more engaging because it's creating an exchange. It's a give and take. There's a back and forth that's happening. You can use it as a way to aid in decision making. So if someone's trying to figure out which product, which service, which tier of the offering is right for me, ask the questions, make a recommendation, right? It's a fun way to test their knowledge. How well do you know? How ready are you for? How much do you know about, right? Really great opportunities. And here again, I don't want the tech to be a holdup for you. The oldest cultural quiz that has kind of become a cultural phenomenon is the Cosmo magazine quiz, right? And that's just text on paper and the answer key is upside down. So there are absolutely approachable ways that you could create something like this. You can do it in print, you can do it digitally. There are plenty of, embeddable iframe tools and, other tools that you could subscribe to if you have the budget and interest in that to create more dynamic things. Even something like Google Forms, which is free typically for most of our use cases, you can use to create a simple quiz experience. So really great opportunity to be fun, to put your audience into these categories and create more of an exchange of that same information. All right, now I want to differentiate here quickly between a quiz and a tool. So just quickly, a quiz has right and wrong answers or has answers that coordinate to a specific final result. If the quiz is trying to pair you with which tier of the product is right for you, the answer at the end will not be Seven Orange or Jennifer Aniston because those are not acceptable responses that you have pre-programmed as outcomes for the quiz. Now, a tool, you don't actually set all the possible answers. For a tool, you set the conditions, the calculations, and the answers are custom based on the audience input. So examples here would be things like a calculator, a converter, an equivalency tool of some kind. Those kinds of things, again, not as applicable for many of the stories that we want to tell, but sometimes it can be really valuable. It might be a lookup of some kind. It might be if we're looking to launch a new product and people want to figure out how do they go from one to the other, let's create an equivalency tool that helps them figure out if you're currently using XYZ, how much do you need of this new one? Or to our point, if you are trying to figure out earlier our example of like which tier of the service is right for you, enter in your information. What's the size of your organization? How many user seats do you need? How frequently will you be using the tool? We do a little calculation. You should probably be using tier number 7, right? So there's ways for you to do this, again, that are very valuable, very highly engaging, and again, makes it an exchange of information with your audience, not just a one-way delivery of it. Now, the last suggestion, again, the last one of these 10 that you may not be using as often, is a map. So, again, a lot of the stories that we tell naturally have a geographic element to them. They naturally have some element of being able to plot things in different places, whether that is different places in the city, in the country, in the world, or different rooms in the home where your product could be used, different parts of the body that are affected by the service that you offer, right? There's lots of different ways you can do this. I've seen one that I saw that was pretty cool was Gillette, the razor company, created a map of the face that showed for men which direction the hair tends to grow in different parts of the face. It literally was a map of your chin. It was pretty interesting stuff. So don't be limited just by direction giving, that there are ways you can create a map where you're drawing out the physical space, to help people understand. Again, more visual and more engaging than a lot of the other formats we have. And here again, please don't be intimidated by the tech. You can find existing maps that are royalty free that you can plot on. You can use tools that are free like Canva to create those kind of maps of your own. And you can also use Google Maps and other similar tools have the ability for you to create custom pins on a map that you can share. So there are tools available. Don't be intimidated. Here is that screenshot slide, if you will, giving you those 10 formats we talked about. So again, once you have your focus already figured out, you know how you want to tell that story, the question to ask is, okay, well, could we bring that story to life through writing? Yeah, that's pretty easy, pretty standard. Maybe we could do a live video on site and let people see what's happening as it happens. Or maybe we can do a timeline that walks people through the history of how we got to this point. Maybe we could create a map that shows all the different places where we source our materials from to show how committed we are to being, local and supporting our local economy. There's lots of ways to do this stuff. There is no one right or wrong answer, but this again gives you a reference list of 10 possible options for how you can bring those stories to life, probably in a new or different way than you have before, and in many cases in a more engaging way than you have before. As promised before, I want to give you 3 prompts. So again, for those of you who are watching on a replay, this is a great time to pause and work through some of these activities. For those of us here live, you can wait for the replay to do the same, take a screenshot or write these down. I've got 3 prompts for you to start exercising this in your day-to-day to get those ideas flowing. So the first one would be to think of 3 infographic ideas. What are 3 stories you need to tell that could be well delivered through an infographic? How could you create some sort of graphical representation of that story that would make it really interesting to engage with? The next one is timeline. What are 3 stories, even stuff you've already done, that you can redo or revamp through the lens of a timeline? How could we create a visual timeline of some kind that walks through a process from start to finish, for example? And then a map. What are 3 different stories we've told in the past or need to tell in the future that we could present to our audience in the form of a map that would make it easier for them to engage with? So I want to pause for a quick review here because I think this is where we start to tie everything all together. So again, if you want consistent creativity, you need to have some kind of system to be accessing this stuff. The system I propose, not the only one, but one that I know works really well for the clients that I work with and that I've taught this to, is idea of a focus and a format, of using them as separate levers that can be combined in different ways. We went through 10 different focuses that you could consider: people, basics, details, history, process, curation, data, product, example, and opinion. And we talked through what some of those might look like. And then we walked through 10 different formats you can consider for how to bring those stories to life: writing, infographic, audio, video, and live video, image gallery, timeline, quiz, tool, and map. Some of those, again, in the first column, probably more familiar, and hopefully some in the second column giving you fresh ideas for how you could approach those things. When you do this, when you have 10 focuses as your inspiration list and 10 formats you could use to bring your stories to life, you end up with something like this. Now, again, I know this looks intimidating. All I have done here is take those focuses, people, basics, details, history, process, etc., and put them across the top, and taken those formats and put them down the side there: writing, infographic, audio, video, etc. Just to give you a visual representation of, if you understand those 10 focuses and you understand those 10 formats, you can create 100 possible combinations of any story you need to tell, which means there's absolutely no reason you have to use the same way to tell that story over and over and over again. Because each of these can also be adapted and changed and tweaked. So there are at least 100 possible ways to tell any story you need to tell. Now, the goal, as I said, is not to make 100 of these content ideas. That's probably too much for anyone to talk about any one thing. So I'm not trying to convince you of that. But what I do want you to know is that you have options and you can consider those options the next time you feel stuck. The next time you feel like, man, the last 5 of these we did got no engagement, no comments, no clicks, no shares. How could we do something different? How can we liven it up? How could we get more engagement? I want you to consider those options that are available to you. I want you to ask yourself, could we tell this through the lens of a different focus? Maybe we always tell people focused stories and we should try data, or vice versa. Maybe we've always talked about what's coming up next by giving examples or case studies of our product, but we've never actually looked back at the history and talked about how we got to this point. Maybe that would be more interesting. So using that focus as a lever to see how you might liven it up. And then to ask the question of which of these formats might help us present it in a more engaging way or in a new way that we can see if it's more engaging. Maybe we do a lot of writing or a lot of video, but we haven't ever tried a quiz or we've not tried audio. Maybe there's a more engaging way for us to tell that story. So that is my wish for you. Now you have your 10 focuses as your inspiration list. You have 10 formats you could consider. I hope that the next time you're up against having to create the same old, you can find a fresh new way to look at it and find a fresh new combination of focus and format that hopefully creates a much more engaging outcome for you. So thank you for that. We are going to move into Q&A. So as a reminder, if you have a question, please use that Q&A function, the chat function. Go ahead and submit your questions so that we can answer those for you. If we don't get to all of them, we can do some follow-ups as well, but wanted to give some time here to add those. If you want more information about this, again, I've given you a pretty good Reader's Digest summary of what's in the Content Fuel framework, but you can dive in deep. I've got examples and prompts for all of these things in there. And also, this is just part 2 of a 3-part adventure that Ralph and I are taking you on here. We did part 1 where we talked about earning trust through content, earning trust with your audience. That's that first QR code there, episode 1. And we have another one coming up soon that you can register for by scanning that other QR code there. So without further ado, Ralph, I think this is all we've got. We can go ahead and start answering some of those questions that may have come in while we were going.
Thank you so much. My goodness gracious, this is fantastic. I can't believe, that you have all of this information on creating content and are able to package it so well in a condensed form. And, our audience is so appreciative. So thank you for that. And no better time than to be getting ready for 2026 than to be doing this sort of a thing as far as creating content. And we do have some questions, so thank you for being available for these. The first question I think is on everybody's mind that is a one-person team, if you will. And what
Yep.
that is, again, we saw a lot of ideas here, but most of the folks that we work with are on small, if not one-person teams. How
Yeah.
should they prioritize what they just heard?
That's a good, great question. So I think first of all, you're in good company. Most marketing teams, we don't have the people, the tools, the budget we wish we had. So do not despair. You're not alone.
Right.
But I think where you really want to focus is what you think will make the biggest difference. And I know that that sounds like kind of a non-answer, but what I mean is if you are really limited in terms of your format and you're like, look, we really can only do writing right now, well, then you probably want to focus on the focuses and say, well, if I can only do writing, let me try to approach that writing from a bunch of different perspectives. If you're like, look, we are really heavily regulated, we can't share any of the data, or we can't talk about people, maybe there's some exception that's limiting your use of different focuses. I would explore the formats and say, okay, well, if I've got to tell the story in one, through one particular lens, I can only do process focused how-to content. Well, let's try process focused how-to audio. Let's take them on a guided meditation through this process if that's what we've got to do, right? Look and see how you can make things exciting in wherever you feel like you have the most leeway. The other thing I would do is really kind of just make a challenge for yourself to say, look, I know I can't do all of these things at once, but maybe at the end of 2026, I want to have tried three new formats. That gives you a lot of leeway to figure out when and how to do it, but it also allows you to keep stretching, keep growing, keep trying new things in a way that hopefully is reasonable for your time, your budget, your resources.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And I hear this a lot in the supply chain world because we have people who are hardware focused. You know, they have robots or they have
Yeah.
conveyor or automated storage and retrieval systems. And then some of them, you know, they call it vaporware or software. So the question that came in is there a certain focus you can think of that works best for the physical versus the SaaS or software as a service? And what about the formats?
Ooh, this is good. So, I'm just pulling up our list here so I can kind of run through mentally and kind of see what we've got here. So, the good news, is that again, they all work for any type. So, you shouldn't find that there's none you can do unless you have, again, some sort of like we're heavily regulated, we're not legally allowed to do XYZ. I can't account for that. But if you are a physical product, I think doing example and process are really helpful, and data as well. Those are going to help you talk about the efficiency of your product and help people visualize it in their own environment. So that was data. What did I say? Process, data, and an example, just like really showing how it works. But if you're having trouble humanizing it, really focusing on the people. That's a lot of times what happens when we see like, oh, we're always talking about the data of how effective our product is, of how amazing our robots are, and all the things they're compatible with. Like, let's talk to the people who made this stuff possible. Try to humanize it a little bit. For the vaporware, as you called it,
Yeah.
I think example is especially helpful because when you're talking about something abstract, people need to see how that can come to life. I think details is going to be important too, because you're going to want to detail out like how you're different than some of the other options out there. And if you are in vaporware, I would highly suggest checking out the first episode we did too, because that's going to be even more important to prove the value of your software when you don't have a physical demonstration to provide. And then in terms of formats, I don't know. I think a lot of times people think like, well, if I don't have a physical product, I can't do anything visual, right? Like I can't show if I'm doing vaporware, how am I supposed to do images or videos or things like that? There's still a lot of options. There's ways that you can visualize these things. You can do screen grabs, you can do screen video capture, you can show side-by-side comparisons of multiple different, interfaces, different integrations. And you can also create like illustrations. You could use some of the tools that are out there to create visuals that represent what you're talking about, even if you can't visualize the exact product. So I think, again, I think you can make use of all of them. I think the question is if you are using vaporware, you're going to want to think about what the tools are available to let you visualize that in a way that's going to make it compelling for visual formats.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And look, for the folks out there who are maybe challenging this whole visual on software or vaporware, you know, there are verticals and industries within supply chain that have to deal with this on a regular basis. I just got back 2 weeks ago from a planning summit, and this is primarily all software and, vaporware and things that you can't put your fingers on. And that's the only way they have to communicate. So please understand, it is possible and it is something that you can get creative and be effective. I got to get to this question. Buy-in from the executives, buy-in from the people who are responsible for the investment in time and money in allowing us to create content that create trust, which allow us to be more effective and yet revenue generating and profitable in the
Yeah.
next 12 months. How do I communicate, articulate to them how important this system that you've talked about in the last hour is?
So one of the best ways to get buy-in is by using their own words or strategies back to them, right? I don't want to say against them because that sounds
Yeah.
malicious. But
Right.
what I mean is if someone is giving you a directive that we want to be more, we want, we have higher goals to reach next quarter, or we want to be more disruptive, we want to be more like this competitor that I see all over my whatever feed, right?
Right.
I would take that and use that as a reason that you need to be doing more things like this. So some of the most successful cases for like, managing upward is to say, you remember that example you sent me from so and so company that you said said was really cool and you said, why aren't we doing that? I would love to do that. I just need access to this tool and I could be creating stuff just like that thing that you loved so much, right? Or you know how you said you really want us to be doing something different in 2026 or in the next quarter? Here's what I want to try to do something different and bigger in the next quarter. So I would try to frame this type of activity of branching out and trying new content focuses and formats as the fulfillment of something that they have specifically requested. That's maybe more psychology than content and
No, I
marketing, but
love it.
that's what I have seen work really well, is to sort of flip it back around to them, to help them see that this is something that they're actually wanting as well.
Yeah, match the answer with the question. I love it.
Yep.
All right, last thing before I let you go, and this has been wonderful, and I look forward to episode 3. By all means, everybody should register for that as soon as you can using that QR code. You will get an email that has the URL, so you can do that as well. But before we let them go, Mel, we need a memory hook and an action item. So what am I remembering? What am I doing so that we can feel like we can apply what we learned today right now?
All right, so the one thing I want you to remember, if nothing else, is that your content will always be better, perform better, do better if you determine your focus, your topic, before you determine the format, the package you're going to put it in, right? So always do focus first. And the way you can kind of put that into action, like starting right away, is the next time you are asked to create something, or the next time you look at your content calendar and you've got to create something, start your brainstorm by just keeping format out of the conversation. Like, let's get focus aligned. What are we trying to communicate? What are we trying to talk about? What do we need them to know? What do we want to change their mind about? Really ask the focus related questions. And once you're clear on that, then ask the question, all right, now that we're all aligned, we want them to understand XYZ. We need them to believe XYZ. How can we best deliver that message? And then figure out which format is going to be best.
Perfect. Well, listen, once again, thank you. And look, folks, this is it. We're relevant now in the supply chain space. Let's have some fun. Let's get out there. Let's do some marketing. I've heard for years, Ralph, how do I knock on more doors? And it's a good question because you want to brand, you want to get out there. But here's what I'm going to challenge you with for the next 12 months. Instead of you knocking on their doors, how about they knock on yours? And let's focus on that for the next 12 months. Until the next episode, guys, take care.